Chapter 3. The faint creaking stopped. Whoever had trodden the boards must still be there, neither moving on nor returning. Overcome with curiosity, Peg slipped out of bed, pulled on a cotton wrapper, and silently opened her bedroom door. Deep in the shadows, hugging the wall on the top of the stairs, sat Violet Hennessy. Her chin stretched forward, her head tilted as if she were listening to the conversation in the parlor below. Peg sucked in her breath, astounded at the change in Miss Hennessy. The shy, drab victim had disappeared, replaced by a handsome woman, her long, dark hair woven in a thick braid that hung over a ruffled, embroidered white cotton gown, and wrapper more elegant than Peg could have imagined. The tiny sound Peg made had alerted Miss Hennessy, who whirled, eyes wide. For just an instant they stared at each other, and then Miss Hennessy's shoulders curled inward and she slumped against the wall, tugging the neck of her wrapper into a wad under her chin. A tiny apologetic smile flickered on her lips, and she motioned for Peg to come closer. Blinking, Peg wondered if she had imagined the quick glimpse of the woman she thought she saw. She dropped to the top stair beside Miss Hennessy, who whispered into Peg's ears, "I left my reticule somewhere upstairs. I was on my way to retrieve it, but I was suddenly overcome with dizziness. I sat down, afraid I'd fall." "I'll get Ma," Peg said, and began to rise, but Miss Hennessy clutched Peg's arm with fragile, trembling fingers. "Please don't worry your mother about my condition," she murmured. "I'm feeling stronger now. I'm sure I can go back to my room unaided, but I do need the sleeping powders I keep in my reticule. Please, Peg, will you fetch it for me?" Tears welled up in Miss Hennessy's eyes. She looked so pitiful that sympathy for her immediately swept away any doubts Peg may have had. "Of course I will," she said. She helped Miss Hennessy to her feet and trod down the stairs and into the parlor. The conversation suddenly stopped. "You were talking about Miss Hennessy, weren't you?" Peg demanded. Frances looked surprised. "We were talking about Petey. I was telling how well he's reading now, and the house about some of the funny stories he made up." "It doesn't matter what we were talking about," Ma said sternly. "Just what are you doing up out of bed so long after your bedtime?" Peg sighed elaborately and rolled her eyes. "Ma, you take for granted I'm breaking rules. You don't even give me a chance to explain, even though I have a perfectly good reason for coming downstairs. You didn't even ask why I'm here." "That's exactly what I did do. Ask," Ma told her. "And now will you please give me an answer?" Indignantly, Peg stood as tall as she could. "Miss Hennessy left her reticule on the table, and she asked me to come down and get it for her." Ma put down her mending and got to her feet. "You're right, Peg. You did have a good reason. I'll help you find the reticule." Frances jumped up. "I know where it is. It's on the table by the door," she said. "I'll get it myself." Peg whirled around and swept up the plain black reticule and marched toward the stairs. And when she realized that Ma was right on her heels, she stopped and turned. "Miss Hennessy asked me not to bother you. She wouldn't like it if you came upstairs." "She may need something," Ma answered. "Fresh water, an extra blanket." "If she does, I'll take care of it," Peg complained. "I know how to fetch water or find a blanket." Ma put her hands on Peg's shoulders. For an instant she hesitated, then she said, "Don't be so quick to imagine offense, love. You're a fine, capable girl, and I appreciate all that you do. Give us a kiss now. I'll see you bright and early in the morning." When her resentment dissolved in a rush, Peg kissed her mother's cheek and hurried up the stairs. She dutifully offered the fresh water and extra blanket to Miss Hennessy, who held in the middle of the bed the quilt up to her nose. "No, thank you," Miss Hennessy mumbled. "I need nothing more than rest." Peg, more sleepy than she'd want to admit, gratefully shut the door to the guest room behind her and headed for bed. In the morning she reluctantly prepared for school, begging Ma, "Can't I at least stay till Frances gets the horse and wagon?" But Ma shook her head. Peg turned to Frances. "Why can't you visit us longer? Do you have to go so soon?" "I'm needed at home," Frances said, and Peg saw Ma wince. "This is your home, too," Peg insisted. Frances glanced at Ma and smiled, and gently smoothed the curled red fringe of hair that tugged over Peg's forehead. "I'm teaching school now, Peg. I was lucky to find a full-time position nearby, and I don't want to lose it." "Teaching school? Oh, Frances, I wish you were my teacher." "No, you don't," Frances teased. "I'll make you stay after school and clean all the slates." "Who's teaching your students while you're here?" "Mrs. Cummings was kind enough to step in for me for a few days, but I can't impose on her good nature." Peg sighed in admiration of her big sister, 16 and already with a full-time teaching job. There had been times lately when Peg, hating the daily memorization of arithmetic tables and history dates, had promised herself never to set foot inside a schoolhouse when she'd reached 14. But the moment she began thinking favorably about someday becoming a teacher, just like Frances, as Ma packed a small lunch pail for Peg and a large basket of food for Frances with treats inside for Petey, she worried aloud. "Are you sure you'll be safe traveling alone?" she asked. "I'll be fine, Ma. I can take care of myself." "But what if Quantrill and his like—" "Quantrill and the men ran to the south when the Union forces rode into Lawrence. There are other bushwhackers about. Ma, you know as well as I do that's the lower counties along the Kansas-Missouri border that have had the most trouble. During the last few months, there's been very few skirmishes in Buckingham County or in northern Kansas. Buchanan County, or in northern Kansas. All well and good, but you'll be traveling until late tonight." Frances smiled. "I can handle a rifle as well as any man. I'll be fine, I promise." A rifle? Was there nothing Frances couldn't do? Peg's heart swelled with admiration. Ma paused, folded a cloth over the contents of a basket. She looked at Frances with such yearning in her eyes that the feeling in Peg's heart turned to a dull ache. May I ask God's blessing upon you, Frances Mary. May he send his angels to guide and protect you on your journey. She took a long, shuddering breath and added, My goodness, look at the time. Run, Peg, or you'll be late for school. Ma, Peg complained, but she gave her mother and Frances quick hugs and hurried out the front door. Peg had no sooner shut the door behind her than Miss Hennessy, who swathed in shawls, suddenly appeared on her side. Peg jumped and let out a squeak of fright. Oh dear, I didn't mean to startle you, Miss Hennessy said. She gripped Peg's arm with much more strength than she'd shown the night before. Bending close to Peg's ear, she said, I've been waiting to talk to you. I need your help. I'll get Ma, Peg began, and motioned toward the house, but Miss Hennessy shook her head. This is something just between you and me. Again the shy smile flickered. It's easy to see you're an intelligent, brave girl, brave and smart enough to keep a secret. What secret? That I'm staying here at your home? Peg knew she must have looked surprised because Miss Hennessy hurried to explain, Oh, there's bound to be some people who will know I'm here. I'm not hiding from your neighbors. It's just rather that as few people as possible know my presence. I'm asking you not to tell your friends or your teacher or the shopkeeper or anyone else with whom you might stop and visit. Peg hesitated. The only thing that could possibly pull her away from Frances Mary's departure was this mysterious woman who had come to visit them and was to tell her friends what had happened. May would turn pink with envy. Her sister April would beg to be told more. Marcus and Willie would scoff, but they'd listen, especially if Peg made the story as exciting as possible. She'd already planned how she'd begin. It was late last night, and we heard a frantic pounding at our door. After my dreadful experience, I'm so afraid, Miss Hennessy said, tears rushing to her eyes again, interrupting Peg's thoughts. I'm so terribly, terribly afraid. I won't tell, Peg promised, disgusted at her quick capitulation, because she always kept her promises no matter what. There went her few moments of glory at school. Thank you, Miss Hennessy whispered. She patted Peg's shoulder and silently opened the door and slipped into the house. Why should Miss Hennessy be so afraid? Peg wondered. She'd left Lawrence before Quantrill had even arrived. He and his men certainly wouldn't follow her here. Peg heard the school bell in the distance. She was going to be late, which meant she'd be punished again. What was it going to be this time? A slap on the hands with a ruler, sitting in the corner during recess? Taking a firm grip on her lunch pail and books, Peg ran as fast as she could up the hill. Close to 4 o'clock, when Peg arrived home, she found Ma and Miss Hennessy in the kitchen having a companionable cup of tea. Ma greeted Peg with a kiss, took the cozy off the large teapot, and poured Peg a cup. Miss Hennessy's eyes searched Peg's face, and Peg, knowing what she was asking, gave a slight nod. Gratefully, Miss Hennessy sank back in her chair, cradling her cup under her chin, breathing in a fragrant steam. You'll be glad to know that Miss Hennessy is feeling nearly her own self again, Ma told Peg. That's good news, Peg said. Miss Hennessy looked dowdy and plain, but her cheeks were pink, and she did seem stronger. For one thing, she was no longer ducking her head, peering around, upward like a frightened kitten. As Peg stirred sugar into her teacup, Ma asked, Tell us about school, love. What did you do today? Nothing, Peg said and took a sip, wincing as the tea burned her tongue. It's amazing to me how much learning you absorb, sitting there in a schoolhouse day after day, doing nothing at all. Oh, Ma, Peg mumbled, you know what I mean. We just don't do anything interesting that's enough to talk about. Miss Hennessy spoke up. Your mother and I were talking about her children and the homes they live in. She reached across to gently touch Noreen's hand. It must have been very hard for you to give them up. It would have been much harder to be unable to give them a decent life if they'd remained in New York City. And if Mike... Peg stopped abruptly, hiding her embarrassment and taking another sip of hot tea. Ma probably hadn't told Miss Hennessy about Mike being arrested in New York City for copper stealing, and how she saved him from being sent to Tombs Prison by appealing to Reverend Charles Brace of the Children's Aid Society to intercede with the judge. Frances told me about Mike, Miss Hennessy said softly, as though she could read Peg's mind. Your mother was a very brave woman, and you children, you were very brave too to come west on the orphan train. Brave? Peg hadn't really thought about being brave. Going to foster homes was something that had to be done, so she'd done it without question. She remembered how frightened she'd been in the room, filled with strange people who'd come to look them over, and how she'd clung to Danny, wondering if they'd find homes, wondering if they'd be separated. That journey had taken place 3 long years ago, before Ma had been able to come and join them. John Murphy, whom Ma had married, made a fairly comfortable living with his busy blacksmith shop, and continued to do so in spite of the war. But it wasn't good enough to support 6 children. So all of the Kelly children but Peg, Frances and Petey with her, Megan, Mike, and Danny had stayed with the kind and loving people who had taken them in. Now that you've heard about our family, why don't you tell us something about yours? Ma asked Miss Hennessy. Were you staying with family in Lawrence? No, I stayed only briefly in Lawrence, and not with family. My family's from Boston, Miss Hennessy said in her teacup. Are they still there? No, not any longer. Her voice so faint Peg could scarcely hear her. Miss Hennessy said, It's all too fresh, too painful to talk about. I'm sorry, Ma said. She glanced at the clock, jumped to her feet, and busied herself with scraping carrots out the drain board. After an afterthought, she looked over her shoulder toward Peg. Best to get on going with your sums, my little love. I will, Ma, Peg answered, unable to completely hide her aggravation at being reminded. Miss Hennessy smiled at Peg. I'm sure you're very good at your studies. Fairly good, I guess, Peg answered modestly. I could tell. I know you must do well in your subjects. Do you like history? Not really, Peg admitted. I hate having to memorize names and dates. Miss Hesse nods sympathetically. I suppose that names and dates will always have to be memorized, but history should be interesting. History is about people and the fine things they've done and the mistakes they've made. History is a collection of exciting stories, don't you agree? I guess so, Peg answered. It hadn't occurred to her to think of history in those terms. For example, I know some interesting stories about the childhood and background of President Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps after supper tonight you might want to hear them. Yes, thank you, Peg smiled at Miss Hennessy and reached for her school books. She was surprised at what a nice person Miss Hennessy had turned out to be. Maybe she was wrong at having a few misgivings about her.